Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Leia Love, and thank you for tuning in to Forum 360, where we have a global outlook from a local view. Today, I am so excited. We have Dr. Rachel Talton, and she is going to be talking to us today about fighting racism in a suit and pearls. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and just know how proud I am of you. That's all.
Oh, thank you. Let's give you guys a little bit of background about Dr. Rachel, and she is the CEO of the award-winning firm Synergy Marketing Strategy and Research Incorporated, the CEO of Flourish Leadership, a professor, a board member, and now taking on a new title and role with diversity and inclusion. I don't even know how you balance it all, but again, thank you so much for squeezing us into your schedule. And can you tell us a little bit about how you got on this path and on this journey?
Oh my goodness. First of all, it's really a blessing to be sitting here with you and talking about this on this really important day, right? The day before a tremendously important election. I've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Our firm has been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work for 20 years, right? So we were founded in 2002. We're almost 19 years old, and literally since our first day, we have been engaged in helping organizations to create diversity, equity, and inclusion plans, to do diversity, equity, and inclusion recruiting, to create environments where everyone feels that they are welcome and that they belong and that their contribution matters. But that business was only 30% of our company, right? And so we did research, we did leadership development, and that's pretty much what I was known for. I had always called diversity, equity, and inclusion my God job. And I'm sure you remember that from Flourish. This is my God job. This is over here, and my professional work is over here. And so the day that I watched that 8 minutes and 46 seconds that changed the lives of so many people, obviously took George Floyd's life, but really changed the world in terms of our perspectives on race and race relations. By the time that 8 minutes and 46 seconds was over, literally during that time, I realized that my God job needs to be my day job immediately. By the time it was over, I was like, I'm going to change everything about the way that I wake up and think about the eradication of racism. And that is going to be the work that I'm involved in every single day. The second thing that I learned, although, you've already said, I have lots of pieces of paper, MBA in finance, PhD in management, tons and tons of certifications. I decided I didn't know enough. My husband was like, really, Rachel? But 4 days after George Floyd's untimely death, I called Cornell University and signed up for their diversity, equity, and inclusion certification. So I have finished that now, and I'm on the path to today. I think our diversity, equity, and inclusion work is 93% of what on a daily basis, 93%.
Awesome. So let's give some context to this. A lot of people think that diversity is just black and white. What is an accurate definition of diversity?
So there are, now you want me to put my professor hat on, there are a minimum of 34 different elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So there's what you can see. There's our race, our gender, almost our height, right? And then there are things that you can't see, like our religion, our political views, our attitudes towards certain people, our cultural competency. Those are things that you can't see. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, your socioeconomic status, all of those things are included when you think about diversity. So you're absolutely right. Most people think of diversity as gender or race, but there are 34 minimum different elements of diversity that we need to take a look at and make sure, again, that not only that people feel that they belong, but that their uniqueness is valued in our companies, in our communities, in our churches, and in our lives.
Okay, now you mentioned equity. What is the difference between equity and equality? I
Oh,
think a lot of people get confused as well.
absolutely, that's a great question. So equity is, I like to talk about the houses on fire, right? You may have heard this before. So this idea that we're all treated equally, we all live together, everybody sort of sings kumbaya, but equity is when one of those houses is on fire and you say, well, all houses matter. Well, all houses don't matter right now. The one that's on fire is the one that matters. And so equity is really taking a step back and looking at each individual and or group and understanding what barriers to equality, right, that they have experienced, and making sure that you may have to reach over a little bit further to give those people a hand. Equality is when everyone literally has the same opportunities and are viewed in the same way. And so when I say that to you, you know that we have a long, long way to go, Leah, in terms of really creating a society where equality is our in our DNA, or is our natural state.
Now, I know sometimes some people think as though they don't have any biases, and that they do actually have implicit bias, but they just don't know that. So what would you say to people who may say, I don't have any bias, I have people of all different races, genders, ages, all that kind of stuff as friends? What would be your response to that type of a statement?
Yeah, so I say this in pretty much all of my trainings, right? If you have a brain, then you have biases. So every single one of us, black, white, male, female, tall, short, all of us have biases. And the reason is, and I don't want to get into the neuroscience because we don't have enough time, but the reason is that we are inundated with 9 million bits of data per second. And so our brain has to make decisions about that data. And so we make, quote unquote, assumptions about people, about circumstances, about things. And that's what bias is. It doesn't automatically make you a racist or a misogynist or a xenophobe. It's just that your brain literally, because of all of the data that it's taking in, has to make quick decisions. And so when those biases show up in the world based on how we make decisions, how we hire, what friends we have, etc., then it's our job to take a step back and to literally check them and make sure that we are treating everyone equally, that we are really that we're really trying to treat everyone the same. And so I always tell people, we're not going to completely negate biases. There's no way you can get rid of them. Which ice cream do you like better, chocolate or vanilla? You either like one or the other better, and that's okay. The issue is, how do you mitigate those biases in your decision making and in your actions, and particularly if you are a person with power over people, like power over hiring, power over equal pay, right, and so power over policy. Right, so all of these places where bias can not just be in your head, but show up in your decision making, that's where we all need to really mitigate our biases. And when I say all, I really do mean all of us, all of us have biases. And so our goal is to make sure that we're mitigating them so that we give everyone an equal opportunity.
Now, you just mentioned hiring practices and people who are in power. What do you say to people who believe that systemic racism does not exist? And how do you define systemic racism?
Again, boy, you're just begging for a 2-week retreat here, which I'm not surprised at all.
You know
Um,
why? Because so many times we have fluff as a definition of it, but it's not necessarily the right definition. And so if you don't have a good definition of it, then you're continued to be led astray, right?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. So first of all, systemic racism definitely does exist in our American society. Obviously, we have the original sin of slavery that our country is grappling with. And that doesn't even include the original Indians that were here, right? And so we have a system that was built on systemic racism. And so, if you take a look back through history, the way our country was built, even once slavery supposedly we were emancipated, and then there was Juneteenth and we were actually emancipated, the system that we came out of quote unquote slavery into was built around that racism, and it exists today. Let's just take it out of racism and look at even gender inequality. We have the Fortune 500 companies, and today, November 2nd, 2020, less than 5% of the people running those companies, meaning CEOs, are female, right? And so that's obviously, it's not that women are not smart enough or not energetic enough or not passionate enough, don't have the communication skills, don't have the collaboration skills, don't have the innovation skills. It's because the system that built these corporations were built based on the dominant gender in our society today. They were built on those kinds of principles. What are the principles that undergird how you make selections? And so that's kind of what we're dealing with systemic racism in corporations, because of the way that we were built, the way that we were raised, the things that were taught in school. I mean, it literally is everything. It's the things that were taught in school. It's the housing and redlining and the places that we live. It's healthcare, who gets it, who doesn't. It's economics, who has opportunities and access to wealth and who doesn't. It's small business, who has access to customers and who doesn't. So all of these things are systemic. And so what I really try to tell people is that each and every one of us as Americans, we're not even talking the global situation, that's a completely different discussion, but each and every one of us as Americans has a responsibility, at least in my mind, to take a look at their own thinking, take a look at their own power. A lot of this discussion is about power. What do you have power over? And try to eradicate the systemic nature of racism. So you may not be able to take back all of the unfair housing. You talked about Jim, my husband, who was raised in Pittsburgh in literally, it wasn't even the ghettos, it was the projects. Of course, his dad was murdered when he was 4, and his mom had 4 kids. She was like 19 with 4 children. And so if you think about the hunger that they faced, the health problems, all of them have cancer because they lived right next to steel mills, right? And so the education system, Jimmy was smart and determined to make a difference. All of his siblings did not make the same choices. So he had a mentor, right? And again, you think about this guy that took Jimmy under his wing. If it weren't for that, maybe we would have never met. We might not have ever been married. He might not have had all of the wonderful opportunities to be, one of the first CHROs in the country. It was that one person that took him under his wing. And so when I say that each one of us has a responsibility and an opportunity, I don't care who you are or how much power you have the power over your own sphere of influence and your own thinking and your own actions. And I think about that gentleman. He's no longer alive today, and I thank God for him because he saved Jimmy's life. And so each one of us has an opportunity to and you and I know this, right? You have a question, you call me, I always answer. And why? Because I know that you are our future, and I have a responsibility to be there for you.
I can't tell you how grateful I am for you and all the other people who have answered that call, and have taken on that responsibility. If you are just now tuning in with us, we are talking to Dr. Rachel Talton about fighting racism in a suit and pearls. And she is the CEO of Synergy Marketing Strategy and Research. Okay, that was a lot, but a very good explanation. And I can't tell you how many people have that story that somebody just took the time to extend their hand and bring them along. So that truly is an important part and factor. I was talking to a young lady the other day, and she says, one of the things that's hard for me is that I can't always tell if somebody is being racist towards me or just rude. So, we have our overt and covert racism. Can you describe that a little bit or talk about a good definition for that as well?
So racism shows up in many ways. And I do want to go back to something that you said a minute ago, as soon as I answer this question. Racism shows up in many ways. And let me just say again, all of us have it, right? I realized, even in my piece, Fighting Racism in a Suit and Pearls, I talked about how when I was younger, I went to an all-girls school, and I was at one of my very wealthy white friends' homes. And we were having a snack. Her mom was making us a snack. We were either playing or doing homework, or a little bit of both, probably. And her mom said something about those Black people. And the reason I share this with you is that she probably thought that she wasn't being racist. And so she said something about those Black people, and I was like, oh, excuse me, I'm Black. And she was like, no, not really. And I said, no, my mom's Black and my dad is Black. I'm sure I'm Black. And she said, no, not really. I mean, she literally did not invite me into her whiteness. She just discounted my Blackness, and I literally just disappeared in that moment. And I realized that over 30 years that I had been doing that throughout my career, that I had been disappearing, making myself smaller in order to make other people feel okay. So I say that to say that in her mind, her statement might not have been racist. In my mind, her statement was both racist and rude. Right? And so we have to really be careful that when we say things to people, we listen to the words that we say, and we make sure, and all of us are guilty of this. Like I'm not, someone asked me actually, have you talked to her? Like, what does she think now? And I have not, but I would forgive her for making a mistake. We all make mistakes. I said something to someone about 3 years ago about a Jewish holiday, and I was joking. I mean, I'm the most open, honest, loving person. I literally love everyone, but it offended someone, and she said, that made me feel terrible when you said that, and I was absolutely mortified with myself. But I said, I'm so sorry, and thank you for telling me that the statement that I made. I thought I was Jewish till I was 8 years old, literally, like. All of my friends in Cleveland Heights, because that's where I grew up, were Jewish. I would go to synagogue with them. They would come to church with me. So I was absolutely mortified that I made that mistake. But we're human, right? We make mistakes. The issue is, what do you do about it then? Do you apologize and hug that person and say, I'm so sorry? That's the first step. Do you then not do it again? right? Check yourself, check yourself, check your biases, because again, we all have them. The idea of being rude, that's again a whole nother discussion. But I do want to say that always go back to grandma, right? Your grandmother said, if you don't want to be spoken to in a certain way, then don't speak to people in that way. Just don't. You know what I mean? Like, some of this stuff is just literally going back to what your mother said. What did they tell you in kindergarten? If you're not going to say it in front of grandma, then probably you shouldn't be saying it. I do want to go back to something that you said about Jim and the mentorship that changed his life. Here's an important point, because I love the fact that it was a Black man that took Jim under his wing and took him to Washington, D.C. I mean, most people never left those projects and their community. And so he was really able to change his life. However, I had a mentor have a mentor who is a white male. We could not be more different. He is white, Republican, and accountant. Like, we literally could not be more different. If you couldn't make it up. And we connected over our love of Africa, right? He had traveled to Africa, and I said, oh, I've been to Africa 13 times. And he was like, oh, really? And so we built this friendship and mentorship. He sponsored me, he helped me build Synergy. He helped me literally on his living room floor build Synergy. So just because the person who takes your hand and leads you and cares for you and sponsors you as well as mentors you, looks like you, that's great, but they don't have to look like you. Going back to the idea that it is all of our responsibility to really try to eradicate systemic racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and all of the isms as best we can. I also want to say another thing, because we haven't touched on it, and it is about the LGBTQ plus community, and how obviously disproportionately Black LGBTQ plus people are murdered and have violence committed against them. But there's another community that we also have to take our arms and wrap them around our brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. And real quick, I wanted to know, okay, so somebody wants to begin this work. They want to begin having this uncomfortable conversation with somebody. How do we get to the point of, how do we even start that conversation of being super uncomfortable, or even the people who are afraid of the backlash? If I say something on social media, if I say that I support this, how do we get beyond that and start really being uncomfortable to create these changes?
Yeah, the first thing that I say is to start with yourself. So I'm a qualified administrator for an assessment called the IDI. It's around intercultural competency, and right, so it. And that work, which I try to do with many companies that I start with, it's a great way to start with data, right, and help both individuals and organizations understand where they are on this cultural competency continuum. I would say that it's a great tool. That's a great tool. Debbie Plummer has a great tool to kind of find out where we are. What are Harvard University also has an unconscious bias assessment as well, with many different elements of diversity. Right? We talked about religion, race, LGBTQ, gender, etc. And so I would always start with myself. Start with yourself. Don't go out to social media saying anything. Make sure that whatever it is that you're saying is true and honest for yourself. So understand what your own biases are. Take a look at your own self and make sure that you aren't going to go out there and say something that then you've got to backtrack, right? And then once you understand who you are, understand your weaknesses as well, then you can stand on whatever that statement you make in social media. Or you think about George Floyd again, these performative statements that all the companies, every company put out, suddenly Black Lives Matter. Yesterday they didn't, but now suddenly they do, right? And so I don't mind the performative statements as long as you begin to do the work that is required to make those statements true.
I hate to cut you off because this is so good. We have about 5 seconds.
Oh, goodness. So much awesome. Give me a call. No worries.
I want to thank you so much for your time today, for your insight, and just allowing us to be able to get a little bit uncomfortable to get to a comfortable place. And I just want to remind everybody that even though we may not agree on everything, we still can respect everything. So thank you again so much, Dr. Rachel, for joining us today. And thank you for tuning in to Forum 360, where we have a global outlook from a local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.